Good morning. This is Dr. Hansa Das, and I welcome you to my channel History with Hansa. We have been doing a series of videos on the economic history of British India, in which we have talked about the exploitative characteristics of colonial rule in India and the impact which it had on Indian economy. It led to the complete devastation of Indian economy. In today's video, we are going to talk about rural indebtedness, why it happens, what are the reasons for it, and how the peasants and the farmers are badly affected by it. And we will also look into the possible solutions that could be found out for lessening rural indebtedness. So let us begin with the video today. Uh, now, it is poverty among the agricultural laboring households which leads to rural indebtedness. When the level of poverty increases, the level of debt increases. So the farmers borrow basically because of their poverty, because they do not have enough resources in their hands, and they have to pay the revenue, they have to pay the tax, and that is why they fall into the trap of indebtedness. The burden of debt passes from generation to generation. It is a vicious circle. Once a farmer borrows from a money lender, once a farmer borrows, he falls into the trap of borrowing, and it goes on from generation to generation. So, indebtedness has been termed as a vicious circle. Debt becomes a trap for the borrower, and it becomes very difficult for him to get out of this trap, or to easily get out of this trap. Now, when does indebtedness arise? When income of farmer is not sufficient to repay the debt incurred. When the borrower fails to repay the loan in time and loan goes on accumulating. So because of the pressure of revenue, or because of the pressure of tax, the peasant or the farmer is bound to borrow from the money lender, because if he's not able to pay revenue or tax on his own, he has to depend on the money lender for borrowing money. Now the money lender is uh, an extractive agency, and when the borrower, or when the peasant, he fails to repay the loan in time, the loan goes on accumulating. And also the moneylender charges or gives loan to the peasant or the farmer on an exorbitantly high interest rate, which is also one cause why the peasant falls into the trap of indebtedness. Let us look into the various causes of indebtedness. First is poverty of the farmers. Extreme poverty of the farmers leads them to borrow, and they fall into this trap. They have to borrow for various purposes. What are the reasons why the peasant has to borrow? For example, if there is a crop failure, or a failure of monsoons, floods, etc., and his crop is destroyed, he's not able to gather ample amount of money to pay the revenue, or to, in fact, to just to feed himself. He's bound to borrow. Then he has to purchase seeds, implements, cattle, etc., but he has no income or savings to do so. So these reasons force the peasant or the farmer to borrow. And where does he borrow from? He borrows from the money lender, who charges exorbitantly high rates of interest. Another reason is passion for land. uh, Farmers are keen to make improvements on land, and they do it by borrowing. So whatever improvements they have to make in their agricultural activities, or whatever lands they have to increase, they do it by borrowing. Then ancestral debt. Many agriculturists start their career with a heavy burden of ancestral debt, which increases the debt burden on the inheritors. So it has been a popular saying that the farmer is born in debt, lives in debt, and dies in debt. And when a farmer dies without repaying his debt, it is his um successors who have to repay the debt. So ancestral debt is one of the major reasons of rural indebtedness. Then the ease of taking loan, money lender is easily approachable, which encourages borrowing. So although the money lender is exploiting the farmer by charging him high rates of interest, but the fact remains that money lender is easily approachable, and that is why it is easy for the peasant to borrow. Although it is not very easy for him to pay or repay his loan, but it is very easy to borrow because the money lender is easily approachable. Litigation. Prolonged litigations involve heavy expenditure, and to meet these expenses, farmers take loans, which aggravates indebtedness. Uh, Litigation again is another reason why the peasant has to borrow, because that also involves heavy expenditure. So that is also one reason for indebtedness. Small sized holdings. Small Because of small holdings, modernization of agriculture becomes impossible, and cultivation ceases to be economical. So land becomes insufficient for maintenance of farmer, and so the farmer incurs debt. When the piece of land that the farmer has is insufficient, he's forced to borrow, and once he borrows, he falls into the debt trap. Illiteracy and ignorance, large size of his family, peasant is compelled to borrow money. A peasant, if he has a large family and he has a number of mouths to feed, then naturally, if all his income does not come from agriculture, and then he has to pay the revenue, he has to pay the tax. So all these things lead him to borrow. So illiteracy and ignorance is another factor which leads the farmer into the debt trap. Extravagant agriculture Extravagant expenditure. So there are customs and traditions on marriage, birth and death, etc., for which the farmer needs money. So uh, although there are certain basic reasons for which the peasant has to borrow, without which he cannot survive, there is also extravagant expenditure for which the farmer borrows money. Malpractices of moneylenders, as already described, the moneylender is an extractive agency, and he charges exorbitant rates of interest from the farmers. Plus, he keeps false accounts, and he forces borrowers to part with their land by encouraging farmers to borrow from him. When debt increases, they take away farmers' lands. So that also happens, that when the farmer is unable to repay the debt of or the loan of the money lender, the money lender snatches his land from him. So that also happens. So the malpractices of money lenders also increase his indebtedness. Then there are certain other reasons because of which the money lender falls into the debt trap. For example, high rates of interest, which we have talked about earlier. Pools of high standard of living, excessive burden of land revenue and rent. Because the peasant, the land on which he is cultivating, he also has to pay the revenue, the land revenue or the rent. And if the crop is not good, or if he does not have sufficient money to pay revenue, then automatically he has to borrow. Addiction to drinking. Certain practices which are common with the farmers or peasants, for example, drinking, he has to borrow money, he has to fall into that addiction to drinking, and then he has to borrow money. Inflation. Then there are inadequate infrastructural facilities and institutional arrangements. For example, if he has to get seeds, good varieties of seeds, or certain other agricultural equipments, and he doesn't have money, so he has to borrow. So these are some of the reasons of rural indebtedness. Now, what are the consequences of rural indebtedness? First is the growing pauperization of small and marginal farmers. Already the farmers are not a very well off community, and indebtedness leads to increasing pauperization among them. They become even more impoverished. Then the creation of a class of landless laborers and tenants in the place of independent farmers. They have to borrow, they borrow for land, they borrow for a number of reasons, because of which instead of independent farmers, they get converted into landless laborers and tenants. Also, money lenders become unscrupulous politicians. We've talked about this earlier. Money lenders, they are very easily accessible, easily approachable by the farmer, and therefore they take advantage of this and impose very high rates of interest on them, which leads to deterioration of agriculture, low standard of health, etc. But there are also certain measures which could be taken to eradicate rural indebtedness. First is removing the need for borrowing. So the first aspect is that we need to identify the reasons for borrowing. and try to eliminate those reasons. So if the need for borrowing is removed, the reasons for the need for borrowing are taken care of, then probably the peasant will not be forced to borrow from the moneylender. Then protecting the assets of agriculturists from passing into the hands of the moneylenders. Naturally, when the peasants are unable to pay the to pay the loan which they have taken from the moneylenders, then gradually their assets pass into the hands of the moneylenders. So that also has to be taken care of. Then the regulation of activities of moneylenders. Then another important aspect is nationalization of commercial banks and regional rural banks, cooperative credit institutions, so that there are other agencies from which the peasant could borrow. Because if the moneylender is the only medium, or the moneylender is the only way out for the peasants to borrow, then naturally they'll fall into a debt trap created by the moneylender. But if there are cooperative credit institutions, if there are regional rural banks, if the commercial banks are nationalized, then definitely the peasants will have other means and other sources to borrow from, or to take loans, which will be easier and less exploitative. So these are some of the measures to eradicate rural indebtedness. And this is all for this video. Hope I've made things clear to you. And if you like the video, please share it with your friends and also subscribe to it. In the next video, we will come up with another feature that led to the exploitation of Indian economy by colonial rule. Thank you for today. Thank you very much.